They stopped a U.S. Army colonel from boarding his flight, even though he was escorting a fallen soldier home. What happened next had an entire airport in tears, and the whole nation watching. Hartsfield, Jackson Atlanta International Airport, was its usual storm of noise and motion. Families hurried through security with strollers and backpacks. Business travelers clutched coffee cups like lifelines, rushing toward boarding gates. Children zigzagged through the crowd, laughing while their parents called out for them to slow down. And through all of it, Colonel James Mitchell walked, calm, steady, every step deliberate. His polished dress shoes tapped against the airport floor, a quiet rhythm that matched the unshakable focus in his eyes. This wasn't just another trip. On the tarmac outside, under the August sun, waited a casket draped in the stars and stripes. Inside lay Private First Class Daniel Brooks, 21 years old. A boy who had worn the uniform, fought for his country, and never made it home alive. Mitchell's mission today was simple, but sacred. He would escort Daniel back to his family. He had promised himself years ago, no one gets left behind. At the airline counter, Mitchell slid his military orders and ID across the desk. The ticket agent took them without much expression, her fingers tapping quickly over the keyboard. Then a pause. Her brow furrowed. She looked at the documents again. "Could I see these one more time?" she asked, her voice just a little too polite. Mitchell handed them over again, his tone even. "Everything should be in order." She glanced at a coworker, whispered something, then disappeared behind the counter. The other passengers shifted impatiently behind him. The seconds dragged. Finally, she returned with a stiff smile. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's an issue with your ticket. You won't be able to board this flight." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I'm escorting a fallen soldier. My paperwork is complete. There is no issue." Her eyes flicked away. "It's a security protocol. Policy." The people in line began to notice. A businessman frowned, pulling his phone from his pocket. A mother in sweatpants looked up from her stroller. Mitchell's voice stayed calm but firm. "What policy? Show it to me." The agent hesitated. She didn't have an answer. A supervisor arrived, all polished manners and practiced apologies. "I'm sorry, Colonel, but we can't override the system." That's when a voice came from the line, deep, steady, and carrying the weight of experience. "What kind of policy," the man asked, "keeps a soldier from escorting one of our own?" Heads turned. The speaker was wearing a faded USMC cap, his stance unshakable. Something shifted in the air. A young woman stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I'm live on Instagram," she said. "People need to see this." Mitchell glanced around. More phones were out now. People were filming, snapping pictures. The whispers grew louder. Someone read aloud from their screen. "They just denied a U.S. Army colonel his flight while escorting a fallen soldier. Is this how we treat our heroes?" The hashtag Let Him Fly popped up online within minutes. In the space of a few heartbeats, this wasn't just an airport inconvenience. It was a story breaking in real time. Veterans groups began retweeting. News reporters were tagged. The supervisor returned, this time with an airline executive in a Navy suit, his smile thin and nervous. "Colonel Mitchell, there was an error in our system. We'll fix it immediately. First-class accommodations, no charge." Mitchell didn't smile back. He looked the man in the eye. "If no one recorded this, would I still be standing here?" The man said nothing. Behind them, the crowd murmured in agreement. Phones kept rolling, and though the executive offered comfort in the form of an upgrade, everyone could feel it. This wasn't about a seat on a plane. It was about something far more important. The silence after Mitchell's question hung heavy. The airline executive shifted his weight, avoiding the colonel's eyes. The murmurs in the crowd were no longer whispers. They were voices of frustration, voices that demanded answers. Then, from the edge of the crowd, an airport security officer stepped forward. In his hand, he held a phone, the screen glowing with a news alert. He showed it to the executive. On the screen, bold letters read, "Breaking news. Airline denies colonel escorting fallen soldier." It was already on CNN. The video had traveled faster than any plane. The executive's face paled. And that's when the atmosphere shifted again. Through the crowd came a tall figure in dress greens, his presence commanding attention without a single word. He stopped in front of Mitchell. "Colonel James Mitchell?" "Yes. I'm Major Anthony Reynolds, Department of the Army. We've been informed of the situation. You won't be flying commercial today. A military transport is waiting for you." It was like the air in the room cleared. The tension that had wrapped around the gate area broke into applause. People clapped, cheered, and even shouted, Thank you for your service. Reynolds turned to the airline staff, his voice clipped but unshakable. This will be addressed. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Mitchell turned to the Marine veteran who had spoken up earlier. He extended his hand. Appreciate you, brother. The man gripped his hand firmly. We look out for our own. Mitchell didn't walk toward the boarding gate. He walked toward the exit, toward the next stage of his mission, a mission that mattered more than any public apology ever could. By the time he reached the military transport, the story had already gone viral. Overnight, it spread across every major news network. Veterans organizations issued public statements condemning the airline's actions. Politicians from local leaders to senators called for accountability. The airline's social media feeds were flooded with criticism, and the hashtag Let Him Fly trended nationwide. The next morning, the company's stock price dipped. A coalition of veterans groups filed a formal complaint, citing discrimination and violation of service member protections. The pressure became too much to ignore. The airline CEO went on camera, his tone measured, his words carefully chosen. This was a regrettable misunderstanding. He confirmed that the employees involved had been placed on leave. But for Mitchell, none of that mattered as much as the mission. Hours later, in a quiet town far from the noise of reporters and social media, he stood at attention. In front of him, the Brooks family, mother, father, siblings, gathered in tears as the flag-draped casket was lowered from the transport. Mitchell didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was its own salute. He had brought their son home. When the family reached out to touch the casket, Mitchell's mind went back to the airport, to the strangers who had spoken up, who had refused to stand by silently. They didn't know Daniel Brooks. They didn't know his story, but they knew injustice when they saw it. This was never about a seat upgrade. It was about dignity, about respect, about the promise that no soldier, living or fallen, should ever be treated as an inconvenience. That day in the airport proved something powerful. When people unite against wrong, even a corporation with all its rules and systems can be forced to listen. And as Colonel James Mitchell left the Brooks family's side, he carried one truth with him, a truth he had lived his entire career. No one gets left behind.